Hi, this is part 3 of my NuTone 2057-2058 rebuild, and part 3 we're going to deal with the chassis. Part 4 will be the circuit board. We want to clean up the chassis because it had a lot of dust and buildup on it and everything from all the years being in the customer's wall. What I did to start with is I simply vacuumed it off. I used a vacuum and a dusting brush, and I vacuumed up all the loose bits, and then the rest of it we'll get to as we go along. But the first thing I want to do now is you have control switches on here. So we have the volume control on-off switch, we have the intercom switch, the AM/FM switch, and the room control switch assembly here. And what I want to do is we need to clean all those switches. And I like to do that early on in the project, in the rebuild, because it gives the cleaner a chance to really be effective on the switches. If you do it at the very end, in the last 10 minutes of the rebuild, then it doesn't have time to be as effective. So it's better to do it early on, and then over the course of the next couple of days it sort of soaks in, you might say, and it will end up working better. First thing I want to do is I want to take the room control switchboard assembly out of the chassis, and it has this label on it about how to hook up the wiring, and these usually are falling off. We'll put a little glue on it at the end to put it back in place, but for now we'll just put it out of the way so it doesn't get damaged. And this actually unscrews from the chassis. We've already disconnected some of the wires, and we've marked those with our wire marker numbers. We did that in the last part, and these are our speaker wires here, so that's pretty obvious what those are for. No, I did not mark those because I know where those go. If you were doing this and you were unsure, you might want to mark those. The other thing we have to do is over here we have a twisted green and black wire, and the black wire is here. Everything is the common wire, or would be, some people would call it the ground wire. And so we have a black and a green, and they're twisted together, and they go over here, and they're connected onto terminals of the output transformer, and we have green at the top and black at the bottom. And I'm going to unplug those, but so I don't forget where they go, I'm just going to take a pencil and I'm going to write on the chassis, I'm going to put G for green and B for black. That's perfectly acceptable to do, because if that was done back in the day, that's pretty much how they would have done it. And I just take my needle nose pliers and carefully wiggle the connectors a little bit to free them up, and they unplug, and then we can take out our 4 slotted screws which are in the corners. So we can lift the terminal board out of the chassis. And not only does this make it easier to work on the chassis, but it also makes cleaning the switches a lot easier. So we'll take the screws out, we'll start another cup with screws, and we'll lift this out carefully. Get our green and black wires untangled, put our last screw in there, and here's our switchboard assembly, and we'll clean that in just a little bit. And see, that opens up, it lightens up the chassis, it opens it up, makes it easier to work on. The next thing we need to do is I want to clean the volume control switch and the 2 slide switches here, and I'm going to do that next. So these are our 2 slide switches here. And all we're going to do is we're going to use our deoxit D5 like always, and I put them in the down position so we have better access to the contacts in the switch, which are down in here where you really can't see them very well. And all I'm going to do, I sat it on a rag, and all I'm going to do is spray a little deoxit in there. You don't need a ton, you just need some. And then I'm going to work it back and forth a little bit. And then we'll do a little more. Like that. And that's pretty much all you have to do. You can tell almost immediately that they're much freer and easier to move. And what I probably will end up doing is letting this sit overnight or a day or so, and then I'll probably do it again, because we have all of the other work to do. So this is going to be a part for a while, and you might as well take advantage of it now while it's easy to get to. And I'll go ahead and let that sort of marinate for a while, and then we'll put some more, and over the course of the next couple days we'll keep doing that, and it'll keep improving it as we go. Another thing I like to do on sets like this, or any kind of sets that have switches that have sort of serrated ends on the knobs, you can see these horizontal lines in the ends of the switches themselves, and these are there so when you put your finger on it to slide it, you get better grip and all that kind of stuff. What happens to these are, over the years, just from people's hands and things, they get there's a lot of buildup that gets in the ridges, and they always look kind of whitish and dirty and all that kind of stuff, and it's not very attractive when you get the whole set cleaned up and everything, and then the switches look kind of crummy. So what I do is, just because it's easy and it makes it look so much better, is I use, this is just a small brass bristle brush, and if you take it and you brush in the direction horizontally of the grooves like this, you will remove the buildup that's in the grooves quite a bit. And it cleans them up quite a bit. Now sometimes you get them where they're really heavily built up and it's really bad. And then what you can do is you can take your screwdriver and you can sort of run it through the ridge like this, and that'll sort of gouge out the crud that's in the grooves like that. This one wasn't really that bad, but sometimes they are. And then you can brush them again, and that cleans them up nicely. It may be hard to tell in the video, but they already look a lot better. And then what I'll do at the very end is I'll take a little bit on a rag, I'll take a little bit of what is essentially like Armor All that you put on the dash of your car kind of stuff, and put a little bit on there, and it'll help sort of darken up the black plastic and make it look a little, sort of refresh it and make it look a little bit better. So that's an easy little trick that you can do, and it'll make your set look a lot better when you're all done. So now we're going to do a little bit of work on our volume, tone, and on-off switch. So this is a three-part assembly. The front section here is the volume control pot. The middle section here is the tone control pot, and this back part under here, under the cap with the two big heavy black wires that go into it, this is the on-off switch portion. And the on-off switch portion is high voltage. It's a 110 volt switch. So we're not going to fool around with that, because unless it's a problem right from the beginning, it's best just to leave it alone. Assemblies like this 3-gang assembly, these are not available to buy anywhere anymore. So if you have a problem with one, or you mess it up because you're trying to do the right thing and you overdo it, the only way you're going to be able to replace this is to find a donor chassis and rob it out of it. So it's best not to get in that position to start with. The other thing is there's a little bit of dirt and dust buildup on it. It's not too terribly bad because it's kind of buried down inside the set. So all I'm going to do is take a little brush and simply brush it off, and that gets the loose stuff off. Now, if you've watched any of my other videos about cleaning volume controls, it's all about your deoxit D5 and getting it into the inside of the control. And in this particular case, you've got the best possible situation because the control is out of the chassis. It's easy to get to. You can move the wires out of the way, and you've got a big slot right here where you can spray into, and you have another big slot right here that you can spray into. So it's like the easiest one in the world to do, and all I'm going to do is spray a little bit inside and spray a little bit inside the tone control one and turn it back and forth. And as I turn the tone control adjustment, the first 1/10 of a turn, it was like, oh, really hard to turn. And as soon as I got into the deoxit spray, it totally loosened right up. and now it's really easy to turn. The same thing with the volume control. Now if yours are really hard to turn to start with, you can always put the knobs back on and use the leverage from the knobs, and that makes it easier. So all you got to do is work them back and forth a little bit. And then I'll spray them again a little bit. And a little more in the front one. And you don't need to go crazy with this. You only need to do a little bit. And you'll feel the improvement right away. And that's pretty good. And then just like the slide switches on the front, we'll work it in. And we'll let it marinate in the deoxit for a few days, and we'll spray. We'll probably do this a couple of times just because it's here and it's easy enough to do. And that's that. So that takes care of the slide switches and the volume control assembly. So what's left to do are the room control switches. So we'll do those next. And just like our slide switches on the front of the chassis, it's like you couldn't ask for a better situation to clean switches than you have right here. It's totally out of the chassis. You have great access to all of the inside contacts through the little slot right here. You can see down inside the switches, so it's really easy. And before we spray everything, we're going to give the same treatment to the ends of these switches as we did to the other two, which is we're going to take our bristle brush and we're simply going to go like this, and we're going to clean them up. These are actually in really pretty good condition for their age, a lot better than we normally find. I think the last one of these I did before this one, the switches were so bad I had to use the screwdriver to sort of dig them out. And then also I took some paper towel and sort of soaked it in some orange citrus cleaner, and then put them over the top of each knob and let it sort of soak, and that helped loosen up the grime that builds up in the switch ends. And then clean them and brush them, and by the time I got done they actually looked pretty good, but they were pretty bad to start with. And that's pretty good. The other thing we'll do with these at the end, after they've been sprayed and lubed a bunch of times, is we'll clean up the stems here on the tops, because they're a little dirty, but by the time we spray the deoxit and it gets down on the plastic and everything, it'll help clean it up, and then we'll just go over it with a rag and clean them up, a little Armor All, and we'll be good to go. We'll do the intercom switch first, and that's the red one down here at the end. And even though you can't really tell, when I push this down, it's like hard to push and it's kind of gummy and sticky. But if we spray our deoxit in there, it's like immediately, it's, I don't know, 400 times better than it was. And that's pretty good. And then we're just going to go along. I'm going to stand this up because it'll be easier to do. And you just go down the row and spray a little bit in each switch. And then we'll work the switches back and forth. And what I usually do on these is I started them all in the down position, sprayed them, and then I worked them back and forth, leaving them in the up position. And then I'll flip it over and I'll spray in the bottom of the switch going the opposite direction, because that's the way I like to do it. Make this stand up here. Like that. Oops, got to get the last one. Alright, and then we'll move them again. And then I'm going to leave each one in their center position, like that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, I'm going to wrap it up in the rag that's got deoxit overspray and everything on it, and leave it sit like this in the work tray for the next day, and then I'll do them again. I might do them 2 or 3 times to make sure they work really well, and then they'll be good to go. So that takes care of all of the control switches. Now we have one more thing to do. Okay, so the last bit we're going to do on the chassis in this step is we're going to deal with these. These are capacitors, and these are capacitors that are wired across the input voltage connection on the pins here where it plugs into the high voltage socket. Now, one of the things you have to understand is tube sets like this, these are high voltage sets. This connection here is a 110 volt connection, and then it goes through the transformer, and you can have voltages in a set like this up to 270 volts, I think, is the highest voltage in the chassis. And you have to be careful because it's enough voltage and enough current that if you grab and touch the wrong things, you're going to get hurt. And if you don't, when we get towards the testing of the unit, if you don't hook it up correctly, you can damage your shop equipment and instruments and things like that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to deal with these 2 capacitors. These are in the chassis to help eliminate some of the 60 cycle buzz that you get on tube radios, because basically this is a tube radio. The 60 cycle buzz that you get from the AC power line in our electrical system in the United States. The reason there are 2 capacitors are they're connected in 2 different ways, and they're doing somewhat the same job but in a different manner. Capacitors have 2 leads. There's one at this end and one at this end, and the green capacitor is connected to the hot and the neutral of the incoming 110 volt line. And this sort of waxy yellowy colored one down here, it's connected to the hot side, the hot incoming line, the black wire of the 110 volt that comes in, and then the other side of the capacitor is wired to the chassis. The reason that these are here, as I said, was to help eliminate the 60 cycle buzz that you get on radios that are powered by 110 volts of electricity from the house's electrical system. The problem with these are when capacitors get really old and they begin to fail, they very gradually over time can turn into big giant resistors. And you don't want a big giant resistor across your incoming electrical voltage on the pins here, because things are going to short out. So what we need to do is we need to replace these with modern capacitors, because these are old and well beyond their expected life, because we don't want them to fail and cause a problem with the set or a problem with the installation where the power comes into the set. So what we're going to replace them with are a modern day version. So what we're going to do is we're going to replace these 2 capacitors with these 2 capacitors. These safety capacitors are designed that if they were to fail for some reason, whatever that may be, they're guaranteed that they will fail in an open condition. There'll be essentially a break in the connection inside the capacitor, and the 2 incoming leads will be permanently disconnected from each other. So if they were to fail, they won't do the job that they're there to do anymore. They won't filter out the buzz from the AC power coming into the unit, but also it won't catch on fire, it won't shock anybody, it won't cause a panic, and so forth. So on these type of sets, these incoming voltage capacitors, the original ones, should always be replaced with modern day safety capacitors, because as the name implies, these are for safety, and these don't cost very much. These are just, $1 or so. So it's not really such a big deal, and it always should be done. So that's what I'm going to do next. I'm not going to show you exactly how to do it because this is a fussy bit to work on. You have to be careful when you do this, because when you work on this, you have to take the incoming plug assembly off the chassis to do this. And one of the things you have to be careful of is getting it back on in the right order. On the top of the plug assembly, there are 2 screws, and the plug assembly, and you'll see here, there are slots here and here. Now this is a piece of insulating cardboard, and in fact I'm going to take one of these off to show you. Don't lose the screw. And if we lift this up carefully, you'll see the rest of the bracket underneath right here. and you'll see here's the hole where the screw went, and then the bracket is slotted. So if you were to loosen both screws, you could actually slide this way and move it closer towards the wall. The reason they made it this way is different houses back in the day had different thicknesses of wall, and you had to be able to compensate for that, because when you close the set up, these pin connectors right here, these have to plug into the socket that's inside the wall housing, and it has to make a good solid connection. So they gave you some adjustment where you can slide the bracket back and forth to accomplish that. To change the capacitors, you have to take the screws out and turn the bracket over to get to the other side. And when you put all of this back together, you have to get it back together in the same spot, so when you plug it in, when the job's all done, it will mate up correctly and so forth. What you can do is you can take your pencil again, because pencil is a traditional way to do it, and you can make a line on the bracket where it lines up with the hole, or you can trace around it here, which works well. You can mark it in 6 different ways if you want to, but the goal is that you want to get it lined up so when the customer gets it back, he can pop it on the wall. There's the cardboard piece, there's our bracket, and we'll mark this side like this, and we'll put some marks here. This one's not too bad because it's at the end of the slot, so that makes it easy. Sometimes you find them where they're like halfway, like this, and then you got to remember where it goes and so forth. Also here it kind of helps because you've got the clean shiny part under the bracket and the dirty grubby part that was not covered up, so you've got kind of a good pattern to show where it sits. But once you take this out, even though I hadn't planned on doing this on camera, if you flip it over like this, you can see the capacitors better, and you can see how they're soldered onto the lugs on the back side of the plug. And this is a rather jumbled up kind of mess in a tight spot, and that's why I'm not going to do this on camera, because it's got to be done properly. And if I can't, it's hard to do it while I'm shooting a video and keeping my hands out of the way, and so on and so on. When it comes time to reassemble the chassis altogether, I'll show you how the new safety caps fit in and so forth. But for now, just know that these are going to get replaced. That's the end of part 3. I hope you found this to be interesting and perhaps helpful. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up on YouTube, because that always helps. There'll be a banner right here that shows you how to subscribe. Click on the bell or on the wheel, put in your email address, and you'll get notifications when we post new videos. That's all for today. See you on the next video.